And we're live. So welcome to the 4th edition of Community Currencies Now. I'm joined by an incredible crew to really talk about empowering people to create their own economies. And let's start with introductions. So I'm Griff Green from the Common Stack, and we're really focused on allowing nonprofit organizations and communities to start creating sustainable funding for public goods. I'll pass it to Julio.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julio Linares. I'm originally from Guatemala. Now I'm based in Berlin. I'm part of the Basic Income Earth Network. I do social outreach work, connecting different parts of the network all over the planet, trying to make basic income a reality. And I also work for the Circles UBI project, which Sarah Fenn will be talking about today. And I pass it to Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Julio. So yeah, I'm Sarah. I'm a software developer based in Berlin. Have been working in the blockchain community, in and around the blockchain community for a good 4 years now. I work on Circles. And I'll pass to Brett.
Hey, I'm Brett Scott. I work on lots of different projects around alternative finance and money. I have an old book called The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, but I have a new book coming out, which is going to be on cash, digital money, and financial technology or financial automation. But yeah, that's basically me.
Nice. Well, let's stick with you.
Back to you, Griff.
Thanks, man. But actually, I'm going to kick it back to you. It's like a game of tennis where I want to hear more about your. You're working on a paper. Do you want to dive into it?
Sure. Well, I mean, this I guess this like community currencies group has been started. I've actually have been involved in community currencies for quite a long time prior to the cryptocurrency world, and I mean, I'm not sure, so in the cryptocurrency world, people often aren't very well versed in the sort of pre-crypto alternative currency community. But alternative currency has been going on for like hundreds of years, right, in different forms. And sort of non-state currencies have been going on for hundreds of years. So it's nothing like new. And so, but I also got involved in the crypto world with early Bitcoin and stuff. But I've basically been very frustrated with how the sort of the attitudes and sort of ideas around money in sort of the straightforward Bitcoin world. And what I'm interested in right now is, and I think this is what maybe this new group, Community Currency Alliance, is sort of working towards, is how do we take the best parts of some of the old alternative currency thinking, so from like mutual credit systems and stuff like that, and then hybridize it with some of the best parts of the crypto world, all right? And to like not fetishize either, but to like look at what works, you know? And I find it extremely exciting because like in the sort of like pre-crypto alternative currency worlds, there's like, it's often prone to stagnating because you have a lot of people who are like really, really good on like monetary theory and like how money systems work, but they're often like operating at a very small scale, struggling away, and there's like many like really great like currency practitioners who know a ton about the monetary system, who just really like struggle to get any traction because their systems are almost like too radical. And then you have like Bitcoin came along, and everyone's kind of seen it as a kind of like this great success, and it took a lot of the kind of like energy, as it were, a lot of the attention. But actually the sort of the theories of money and the monetary design in Bitcoin is extremely crude and actually like quite regressive. And anybody who's been involved in the sort of pre-Bitcoin alternative currency world finds it extremely frustrating to try and deal with the crypto community because it's operating on very different paradigms. But the sort of tantalizing potential is, can you use that sort of that energy that you find in the crypto world with all the developers coming in, people excited about developing the technology, and actually using it to reinvigorate the, say, mutual credit systems and stuff. And actually what Sarah is going to be talking about, the Circles system, I mean, Circles is doing just that. It's based on sort of credit, or sort of a version of mutual credit technology, but implemented with in a decentralized way. I can leave it there or elaborate further. I mean, you tell me, what do you guys want?
No, I think the more time we have for discussion, probably the better. Then we can have a fun back and forth about all this stuff, because you are dead on, man. There is not enough cross-pollination between these two powerhouses of the community currency world, with hundreds of years of research backing them, and then the crypto world that's just they're just missing out. There's all this great stuff to be building with. So I love to talk to the bridge builders. But let's dive into Circles and solar in on a project that's really making efforts right now to be part of that bridge and take some of these lessons from the community currency world. Sarah, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, for sure. I have some slides to explain Circles, and also while I share my screen, will confess to being one of those crypto developers who early on did not know anything about the broader world of community currencies. But through working on this project for several years, I've become more familiar with the rich history. And also, before I start presenting this deck, I want to issue the disclaimer or invitation, possibly, that Julio, who is, I think, moderating the questions and comments, is actually also works on Circles with me and is a expert, really, on non-blockchain currencies too. So if he wants to jump in at any moment to correct my inevitable mistakes, it would be welcome. So yeah, Circles. What is Circles? It's a community currency. It's also an app. It's in test phase right now. So we have been deployed on, for the Ethereum folks, the Kovan testnet, and running a pilot in Berlin since January. Here's some screenshots from the app. We're working on a redesign right now and getting ready for, with any luck, our official launch in September. We'll be launching on XDAI network. So we are a system of ERC20 tokens, but it's informed by the world of local currencies. So how does Circles work? Every person in the system launches their own currency. So everyone actually has their own ERC20 token. They make trust connections to other people who they know, hopefully in real life. By doing this, they are certifying that they believe that the person they are trusting is a real person who's only collecting one universal basic income. And they're also saying and agreeing that they will accept this other person's token at a one-to-one exchange rate with their own. We got a little diagram over here of a web of trust. It's basically a web of trust that we're building, which is a sort of common primitive in the world of peer-to-peer identity and cryptography. So these trust connections allow transactions. So you accept the tokens of people that you trust. And they also mitigate risk because you only accept the tokens of people that you trust. Now you may be wondering also, if I only accept the tokens of people that I trust, there's not a lot of liquidity in Circles, right? But we use something called Transitive Transactions to try to ease this problem. To briefly explain that using a diagram that I redrew this diagram for this deck. We have another diagram from the past, so let's try it. Let's see if this one makes more sense. It shows the trust. So say Bob trusts Alice and Alice trusts Carol. Everyone has 10 of their own coins. Carol wants to pay Bob 5 circles, but there's no line of trust going from Bob to Carol. Bob doesn't trust Carol. Bob doesn't accept Carol's coins. Carol can pass her tokens back through Alice's coins, sort of reversing the direction of this arrow. So she sends some of her coins to Alice, and Alice sends some of her coins to Bob. So in the end, when those steps are all completed, Bob has 5 of Alice's coins, only receiving a token that he trusts. Alice has 5 of Carol's coins, but she trusts Carol, so that's okay. in effect, Carol has paid Bob 5 tokens. He has 5 more than he had before. And in terms of the monetary system or monetary design of circles, this is also quite interesting. It's actually it's like the complete opposite of a Bitcoin-like system where it's issued slower and slower over time with an eventual cap on the amount that will be issued. There are sort of 4 parameters that control it in circles. And this has also changed. So this is my first time trying to explain this with these slides too. We used to have demurrage, but now we only have inflation. So there's a sign-up bonus, and this is a one-time payout on sign-up. There's an issuance rate. So this is an amount per second of circles that you get. They sort of trickle into you all the time. There's an inflation rate. So that issuance rate, the amount of circles you get per second, inflates periodically. And then, of course, there's an inflation period. So that's how often the inflation rate is applied. It's basically a compound interest calculation being done on the issuance rate. In our test phase, if any of you have accounts, the parameters we've been using are in the top box. So there's a really nice payout sign-up bonus of 100 circles. Everyone is rich right away. They pay out slowly at 2 circles a day. They inflate at 7% a year, and they have not inflated yet because the inflation period is 1 year. And we deployed in January. For our public launch, we're considering, but have not fully confirmed, that the parameters will be 10 circles sign-up bonus, 8 a day, and then the inflation parameters staying the same. And, you know, why do these parameters exist? In particular, why are we inflating the issuance rate? I think this is really interesting and important and best illustrated with more diagrams. So this is a sequence of inflations going on over time. So here we have a 0.0 in the circle system, and Alice has signed up. Our parameters are super accelerated so that you can see it really quickly and the math is easy. The sign-up bonus doesn't exist. You get 1 circle a minute. It inflates 100% every 5 minutes. So 5 minutes later in this system, Alice is going to have 5 circles, and Bob signs up. Because Bob just signed up, he has 0 circles. The difference is between their balances is 5, but Alice has the ratio between their 2 balances is 0 to 5. Alice has a lot more circles, comparatively speaking, than Bob. 5 more minutes pass in the system. So we've had another inflation, or we've had our inflation period. Circles are now being issued at 2 circles a minute. So each account has been issued 10 circles. Bob has 10 and Alice has 15. The difference between what they have is still 5. But the key thing is that the ratio representing the difference between the amount of tokens that they have is now 2 to 3. So the comparative difference between their wealth has changed significantly. And after another 5 minutes pass, I think this is even more obvious. So now the inflation rate is 3 per minute. Alice does still have 5 more circles than Bob, but Bob has 25 and Alice has 30. The difference between the ratio between what they have is 5 to 6. So in terms of relative spending power, it's equaling out, and that 5 that was the difference, a significant difference at the beginning of the system, is now much less significant. I hope that made sense. This is my first time running through the circles. You know, the Bob circle and Alice's circle are like, you know, very close in size now. Hopefully to illustrate the point. During this test phase, this is Julio down in the corner and Blanca, who also works on our team. We've had a tiny house cafe set up in a garden with a number of other sort of local community initiatives called Free to Sud, where you can go and get a coffee and be onboarded to circles. And This is some, if you are into the analytics or data curious person, here are some stats from the test phase so far. We have had 109 people successfully sign up for Circles. Sad to report 25 who did not finish the registration process. 156 transactions were sent, which is really pretty good considering this is a test net, I think, and almost no real value. And you know, people made use of features we didn't really expect, like adding second devices to their account. The average density of the trust network is 9 outgoing trust connections and almost 6 incoming trust connections too, which is quite nice and dense. Who has the maximum trust? Do we have that on here? Oh, the person who has the most trust is 51 trust connections. It might be more now from when this slide was made. And there's a very fine print there that says we suspect that that person is Julio. And as of when this slide was made, there were 13,000 circles in circulation. So this is a meme about circles with the sort of ultimate conclusion that we should use it to build our own local economy. And given that, actually, I'm excited to share that for Circles users in Berlin between now and September, we are doing what we call the infant industry protection, which is a complicated way of saying if you transact in Circles at your business or even as a human, we will exchange them one-to-one for €1, sort of a way to incentivize economic activity to really harden what we've built as much as possible. So if you are in Berlin, please get in touch and take advantage of that. And finally, if you would like to stay in touch, we have a website. It's ugly right now, so I included a screenshot of the proposed redesign for the website coming soon, which is very cute. We have Twitter, and of course, the app itself is at circles.garden. There's also a series of Telegram chats where we will explain Circles to you, try to solve your problems with the app if you're having them, and you can post things that you would like to buy or sell for Circles. So thanks.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you. That was a great presentation and probably the quickest I've ever seen anyone explain Circles really well. Brett, Julio, are there any questions that you guys are burning to ask? It looks like Julio's got a question from May. How does Circles go about adoption? Is it easy to convey the use cases / benefits for regular people?
Oh man, I totally want to answer that one, but actually I want to ask Julio to answer that one because he's our community lead. I'm a software developer, so I love talking to people about Circles, but it's actually not what I do on the regular.
Well,
Yeah.
Julio.
Yeah, so I think what's well, we're in Germany, right? So what I tell people is that we are building what is called the Wirtschaftsringe, which kind of translates to an economic ring or an economic circle. So basically, what you want is to get people to understand the benefits of exchanging locally with, let's say, other businesses. So basically, to understand what the needs and resources that people have, and then to exchange them locally in a supply chain. So say a farmer might need somebody to fix their truck, no? And they can, pay them in Circles. They could pay labor for people that go to volunteer at a farm for Circles, and then later on, maybe the person who fixed the truck can buy vegetables with Circles. So the idea is to really get the circuits going, so people have places to spend, but also to receive, right? So once people understand this, it's quite easy to get them to think about where can they use it or where can they move it around. And yeah, and it's just a process of getting them to use the app, and then then experience it, and then we improve it from there. So that's kind of like the loops that we're trying to get it to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
I think
that's right.
I was going to say I think that there's a really, it was at one point very successful platform in Toronto, where I'm from originally, called Buns. And it was a platform for trading your stuff. And people really, it was like an eBay Kleinanzeigen, but like, you know, peer-to-peer, with a nice interface. Started in a Facebook group, became an app, eventually did its own cryptocurrency, actually. But I think it was so successful because it was capturing economic activity that wasn't otherwise represented. So basically, for example, the things that I'm selling in the Circles Bazaar right now are things I would just be putting on the curb. But partly I want to, you know, convince my friends to use Circles right now, but also there's like, you know, there's this sort of the marginal economic activity that can easily join. Brett, what were you going to say?
I was going to add, I mean, just for people who are not familiar with these systems, it's probably just in terms of like it's worth noting that credit-based money systems, which is this is one type, the sort of core intuition, which people normally have to learn to understand, is that you can pay people by promising. And this is like a super important component of all credit money systems, is the idea that you pay by promise. In sort of normal economics and sort of like the standard like language around money, we often like told that the act of paying is like me giving something of value to somebody else who will give me something back of value, right? And we're used to this idea of like, even if you look at like most discussions around monetary systems, they talk about like value transfer, like a value transfer system, right? As if like one thing of value is moving this way, another thing of value is moving that way. But this is like, if you want to like go into the kind of like the sort of the dark arts of like money construction, we sort of start from this premise that actually you can actually pay people by making promises. So like a thing comes this way and then a promise goes that way. So for example, I mean, this is why I just want to like, one of the things around the messaging of Circles that I would like to see is that more explicitly highlighted. So those coins that you guys like talk about essentially are promises being issued by people. All right. And I guess this is why you talk about the trust elements of it, because you're only prepared to accept somebody's promises if you know them. All right. And therefore you can create these like networks of rippling trust to make payments. All right. And that's the core thing. And for example, in the cryptocurrency community, this is very poorly understood as a concept, because what people imagine is they imagine these coins as like standalone objects that have been found somewhere in the world. And you kind of like rip them out of cyberspace somehow, and then you like use them to induce somebody else to give you something. All right. And this is like commodity money thinking. This idea that you have to first like find value before somebody else will give you something. Whereas all these systems are basically on this idea that actually, no, what you need is like trust systems, and then you can issue promises, and these promises can circulate around, and this creates expandable, contractible money systems as you issue promises and they come back to you. So I just thought I would really like the Circles, like Julio and Sarah, you guys to like build more of that into like your messaging around Circles, because I haven't really seen it as much as I'd like to.
It's funny that Brett brings this up, because I know, Brett, you specifically have a proposal for how Circles should do this, that we had a lengthy conversation about one night. And it is, it's funny also because one of the reflections I've had since that conversation is how monetary design is so incredibly different from software development, in that Circles could actually entirely be the system that you're describing just by changing its user interface slightly. Like the contracts and the base layer of it wouldn't really change at all. It's like kind of a communication style around Circles. Yeah, that may be a little too in the weeds, because I know we chatted quite a bit, but Brett has a proposal for switching Circles to a inflationary credit limit mutual credit system.
Yeah, one of the first presentations I saw about Circles actually came from Andy Molinas, who's former CTO of MakerDAO, and he made this really strong statement. It's like, hey, it's almost like using Circle's UBI as almost a political movement, where it's like, listen, do you believe everyone should have monetary access to the economic system in a fair, just way? If you believe this, then use Circles, right? If you believe in the concept of UBI, that's all it takes for people who believe this to start using this currency, and then that would give it value, which in some ways is this promise of like, listen, do you believe that in this political movement and its growth? I don't know. I thought that was a very interesting sell, but I think it's still a little bit different than what you're saying, Brett. Maybe you can expand on that.
We don't have to. I mean, this is something that's there's a, I mean, I don't know how many people watching this are like old school, like mutual credit people, but I just want to like flag up for anybody who's not. I'm very aware this debate gets very complicated very quickly if you haven't been trained to think about money in a certain way. If you don't think about money as an accounting system, a lot of the stuff I say will sound very bizarre to you. And this is like a more general problem in society. Like we're used to thinking of money as positive objects, all right? And this actually, if you want to go back to the fiat money system, one of the reasons why we think about money as like an object that sort of moves around is that we are actually not money issuers. There's like two big money issuers in our society, which is the state and central banks, okay? Sorry, central banks and the commercial banks, okay? So like the state part of the money system, which is like central banks and treasuries and stuff. And then there's a commercial banking sector. So private banks, which issue the rest of the money. This is what we call the fiat money system. But basically it's like people, they're the issuers, all right? And then we're like the users. So we experience the money system as these objects that come to us and we have to try and like move them around, right? We've never been on the other side. We've never been on the issuance side of money, all right? And actually one of the best sort of like metaphors to think about this is like, I mean, it's not perfect, but I often think about like an oak tree versus squirrels and acorns, you know, like an oak tree like issues acorns and then squirrels like go around and try to like find the acorns and like gather them, right? But like the oak tree like wants the squirrels to take its acorns. I mean, I'm not actually an ecology expert here, but like I'm assuming it wants them to go like propagate that, right? Very similarly, like money issuers like want you to take the money away from them, right? But we always imagine that like we're like squirrels, like we run around being like these money issuers somehow also like want money somehow, but even though they're the actual issuers of it, right? We've never been trained to think like a money issuer. And when you go into like mutual credit systems and these other types of like new mesh credit systems, which is like what Circles and these various other things are basically are, you have to start thinking like a money issuer. You got to think like, I'm going to be issuing out promises to people and I'm going to try to get them to accept them. And then I'm going to be accepting promises from other people. And this whole system is going to expand and contract and move around me like a kind of dynamic network mesh. All right. And that takes a lot of practice to think about. And the cryptocurrency world always avoided it because they had some like external entity that would just like issue the coins, much like an oak tree, right? And then you sort of scurry around like squirrels trying to find them. So actually in the ordinary Bitcoin world, it often like replicated that same mentality of like, I'm just a user of this object. And so, sorry, that's like a very long spiel, but it takes a lot of practice to learn this idea that you have the power to create systems where people mutually issue promises and then have ways to move them around between themselves.
I think you'd be surprised that a lot of people in the crypto space have started to have this idea, especially in the Ethereum space, where it is easy to copy paste deploy a token and boom, you just issued money. And a lot of people have actually issued tokens, and then also in the mining space for Bitcoin and all these other currencies, they're becoming like part of that oak tree or part of, and they're making acorns and making these currencies. So I think at least the cryptocurrency space is a little bit closer to having that perspective than, you just walk into the bakery. But I would agree, there hasn't been that depth of thought and of really articulating it within our community.
Maybe just to briefly nuance what I said there, because you're right, people have been involved in issuing, but it's almost like the nature of what you are issuing. So what is the token? Okay, so in a lot of the and I don't mean to like diss the crypto community or be like too blunt about it, but like in general, the original mentality was like, we're essentially what we're doing is just issuing these like blank objects. All right. But what we have to kind of get to is this idea that like, what does this token actually mean, or what does it represent? It could actually be like a literal promise that I'm issuing. And so like that's where when I refer to the pre-cryptocurrency community around mutual credit, that's what mutual credit systems have always been about. You have literal like promises, people saying, I'm going to pay you by issuing you a promise, right? Not just an object. I'm not just issuing an object. I'm issuing you like a literal like promise. And then that's the key like thing.
Yeah,
so to introduce maybe some complexity in terms of the crypto perspective on these things. I think that we do see, just like you said, Griff, especially in the Ethereum community, it's kind of almost been a fad in the last year of like people issuing personal coins and then saying, one of these personal coins, you can redeem like an hour of my time or this amount of services from me. And that actually has like some people have done this really early. Evan coin is maybe the earliest example of this I know. But a lot of people also issue copy paste tokens without thinking about this necessarily or attaching them to any sort of promissory structure. In terms of mining, I think to me mining actually, miners are not necessarily issuing money and don't attach it to any promissory structure. I actually think that that what Brett says maps onto my mental model quite well, in that I think of mining and sort of native network tokens as being issued by like the god of solving hashes. So like we've replaced sort of a state bank as being a money issuer with this sort of like random number guessing game as the money generator, but it is the authority for what is generated, not I am just like the recipient, if that makes sense. So I think that the
client, the peer-to-peer client is the issuer, and I'm just the guy watering the client, like watering an acorn tree, and this is the magic.
Yeah, like the Bitcoin network, our trust in the arbitrary lines of code that govern how many Bitcoins are issued, our mutual agreement that these are the only correct lines of code in the 5 forks of Bitcoin or whatever, is I think that actually does map and replicate the sort of money issued externally party. It's just not a state; it's instead some peer-to-peer system. But I do think that the cryptocurrency community is doing the promissory thing too in other places.
Yeah, especially the Ethereum space, and the promises. There's the promise thing. I almost, when you were saying that, I kind of think of also issuing stock in a company, even not IPO, but just like, hey, I'm going to start a company. Do you want to invest in my company? Here's a story. This is the story. The promise is, hey, I'm going to use the money that you give me to start this organization that will be sustainable and give ownership of it some kind of value. I mean, how does that compare versus the? Yeah,
actually, but the main difference between financial instruments like stocks and bonds and stuff is the nature of the promise. In a financial instrument, you're promising money. So like, what is a share? It's basically a promise for money in future, generated in future. Like a fluctuating stream. A bond is like a promise for a fixed stream of money, right? Whereas, that's what those instruments are. So you're right, it's a promissory structure, but it's promising money, whereas a money structure is a promise for real goods and services, which is like another inversion, right? So if you want to think about a share, for example, you could be like, it's a promise for money, which is a promise for real goods and services. The whole financial system is constructed by these like elaborate webs of promissory systems for different types of things, right? But absolutely, you're right. Once we grasp this intuition, you can start to get really creative.
Okay, well, Julio posted this great question from Alexandra Robinson. she asks, in what way does a system like circles contribute to the larger economy being diverted away from creating social and environmental externalities?
Alexandra, I want to make sure I understand your question. Is the premise that circles might contribute to the larger economy, creating fewer sort of harms in the social environmental space?
Yeah, is it less likely to harm the environment? Is it less likely to create other negative externalities?
Well, that's a great open question, isn't it? I would like to believe that it could in some ways, but I somehow feel like it's maybe not the fundamental promise of circles necessarily. Like circles is about redistributing purchasing power, and I think that might affect these other things. But it's not a given to me. Like, will people use circles to purchase more things locally? Yes. Will those things in some way be more sustainably made? Completely unknown. It's my hope that circles could reduce the negative effects of poverty in a region where it became popular. But personally, I think it's really important to understand circles as an experiment. Circles, to me, is a monetary system that is novel and worth trying, but not one that is guaranteed to have any effects. That's maybe not the answer you were looking for.
May I add a little bit?
Please.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Sarah. I think what's important is really about sort of the values that the people who organize the economy bring to the table. So, like, Circles is a tool, right? And it's an experimental tool that may allow people to democratize the economy around them. So, to relocalize the relationships of production, of distribution, of consumption in different ways. So I think that's where it becomes interesting, but it really depends on sort of the ways in which people organize this economy, right? It kind of go beyond that. So it really, yeah, it's up for the people who take it.
Yeah, I guess. Go ahead, Brett.
I was going to maybe add a bit beyond circles, like part of the, if you delve into the sort of localist economy movements, part of the intuition is that one of the reasons for large-scale destruction, ecological destruction in the world, and social injustices is to do with the scale of systems, right? So essentially the fact that we have these huge sprawling systems that span the globe, and you actually, I mean, you walk into supermarkets and you just engage this little player, and you don't see anything beyond the supermarket shelf, right? So when you talk about things like externalities that emerge, like essentially destructive stuff that happens as a result of production processes that we don't really see, and like we just see these products on a shelf, right? Part of the intuition in like alternative economy movements is sometimes if you can reduce the scale of systems, you increase well, sometimes it might be said to like reduce alienation. So like bring you to like into closer sort of contact with your actual reality of your economy. And that's sometimes said to potentially have this as Julia was sort of saying, is like, you know, relocalizing effect where you can start to like potentially reduce ecological destruction and increase social equality. But the main trade-off historically with alternative economy movements is as soon as you reduce the scale of a system, you also reduce the amount of stuff that people can get. And most alternative currency practitioners know this. When you try to like create these like localized money systems, you face this problem, which is like you're essentially making your economic network smaller. You're giving the people more autonomy within that network, but maybe in getting smaller, the types of products you can get are also like reducing. All right. So then part of the grand hope historically in a lot of these kind of like anarchist money movements is like, how can you potentially like network these small systems together such that they can actually achieve both these like environmental and social goals, but also like enable people to get a wide range of goods rather than just like some small like village economy kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that Circles UBI does makes some powerful impact on social externalities, specifically around everybody getting $5 a day or some X amount per day would change a lot of things and could potentially help in a lot of ways. But I don't think that it necessarily like currencies like Circles, that's their goal, is to attack externalities. And I have to take a second to just talk about Common Stack, because that is what we're trying to do, is actually create an economy around these externalities, because the way we see it is that a lot of these externalities are external to the market to the point where they're called a market failure. This is the idea of different economic goods. There's economic goods that are excludable. Think of a movie ticket or your cell phone, where one person can hold it and prevent other people from using it. And in these excludable goods, it's very easy to create, in the market economy that we live in, a business plan. You can kind of create some kind of revenue streams when you can exclude people. But in goods, economic goods that are non-excludable, such as forests, taking care of the less fortunate in society, where anything that really falls prey to the free rider problem, it's very difficult to create a system of like solving these problems with economic means. And so the Common Stack goal is actually create economies that are focused on each externality that you can find. So make it easy so that if someone cares about an externality, we can actually create an economy that is built to support the production of value within that externality, because we all believe that a forest has value. We all know that shared resources have value, even if you can't exclude people from them. And in fact, we build giant governments to support these shared resources. But there isn't. But because we have this, kind of economic monocropping, whereas there is the economy instead of multiple economies, at least in our minds, it's very difficult to do. Because if we lived in a communist economy or a gift economy, actually public goods and non-excludable goods would be well taken care of, and private goods would be the issue. In gift economies like at Burning Man, you have a lot of problem holding on to your private goods. Like in a family, we're all born in most people are born into a gift economy where your families just kind of give to each other, and that's the default economy that we live in. But we kind of forget that there are these multiple economic systems that we're all living within, and they all have different use cases where they can be applied very effectively. And so Circles, I think it still kind of falls in just doing the economy much better. Whereas if you want to attack externalities, you might need to go a different route. And so actually though, let's go back to the topic.
We have a statement actually by Grace, where she says that there are many other problems with the system. I think going back to Brett's point, and she's saying that one of the problems is that it labels certain things as valuable and other things as not valuable, regardless of human values, which I think is kind of on the way that what you're saying, Griff. And then we have a question by Daniel Schimbaum. Would you say that with Circles, a user isn't issuing their own money, but rather they're issuing promises, and the money emerges through interdependence and chains of trust between users? Yeah. Sarah, you want to say something? Or?
I think that's whether a user is issuing money or issuing promises, I don't have a verdict there. I think that you can use maybe both mental models, and they might result in slightly different understandings of Circles, but I'm not sure I have a clear one myself. There are a lot of promises involved in Circles. One, when I sign up, I am attempting to create the promise that I will only collect one universal basic income and not behave in a fraudulent manner. And by trusting me, you're sort of accepting that you believe that my promise is legitimate. And I think that the premise that money emerges through interdependence and chains of trust between users is actually very accurate. If I sign up for Circles and nobody trusts me, I might as well have no money, because though my Circles balance might say 100, I can't spend them with anybody. You can have a situation where some percentage of the Circles that you see in your wallet are effectively unspendable. And indeed, most people in Circles have some amount of unspendable tokens. And so, yeah, so it is only through these trust connections that the money becomes really useful, or the money becomes useful, that the promises are accepted by others, I suppose. Yeah, I feel like others might have some sort of responses.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I've probably already hinted at what I would say at this, is that when promises circulate, they become money, right? So so when the question is, are they issuing their own money, but rather issuing promises? It's like, well, I mean, bear in mind, like in my room here, I could like pick up a piece of paper and write down a promise, all right, to somebody. It doesn't mean that it'll be accepted. It doesn't mean that it's going to be seen as legitimate or will widely circulate around society. It might be just a bilateral promise. You may be the person I'm promising to won't even believe me. Maybe, there's like even a bilateral, like say, relationship between like me and Sarah. I could promise her something, and she might not believe me, right? Never mind anybody else. But let's say, the whole sort of like idea around, if you look at the mainstream money system, you've got very powerful players issuing promises that are widely accepted. But it is possible to create these, I guess maybe to like go back to what Sarah was saying, is like if you can build this network of trusted promises between bilateral parties. So let's say like me and Sarah trust each other, Griff and Julio trust each other, Sarah trusts Julio. You can start to have these bilateral trust lines, or these like credit lines, be all like woven together into these meshes, which essentially then become like a kind of monetary fabric. And essentially that's a kind of a sort of mesh credit network, which is quite related to like mutual credit ideas, right? So I think that's the basic intuition.
Yeah, I mean, all money is a promise, effectively, and it's just the share. It's almost like a shared promise, and these shared promises are like stories, and every money has this story. And if people believe in that story, then it's money. If people don't believe in that story, if they don't believe in that promise, then it's not money. And
well, it actually goes deeper than that, but
yeah.
I mean, there's whole entire legal systems around the promises in the mainstream money system. It's not purely based on belief. It's largely based on law a lot of the time. So, I mean, I agree that there is in the sort of like the sort of experiential layer of money on the sort of the ground level. It's true, we experience it as this kind of like sort of system of belief and so on. But like actually at the sort of the core of it is a very strong legal system that underpins it, which means that when you're trying to do an extra state or a non-state promise-based system, you need all these other things to kind of like help the trust to develop.
I was going to say, in a sort of far out flip of the whole conversation around money and promises, we've been saying that money is a form of promises, but it might be sort of interesting to consider the ways that promises are money too. So I had a real like mind exploding moment in a currency design seminar when they described being certified organic as a form of currency. It's a promise about how your items were produced. And maybe that's not the most useful mental model, but it's certainly a really interesting way to think about all of the various promises being made and going on that we interact with.
Sarah, can I ask you, was that Arthur Brock who was saying something like that?
It was. I was like,
yeah.
And then I had a friend who was like, this is even more far out. She was like, your astrological sign is a form of currency.
Can I throw like a little thing here? So Art Brock, who's been long known in the alternative currency movement and who works on Holochain and these other projects, he has an idea of like currency as what he would say is like currency. So objects that represent currents that you can't see. So like a token of some sort that will represent some underlying flow that's occurred that you didn't directly witness yourself. So for example, like a university certificate, I rock up at some like employer and I say, here's this object which says something happened that you didn't see. And now you can now see this underlying current that occurred, which was like me going to lectures and going studying and passing my exams and so on. Like the employer never saw that happening, right? They just see this object that's presented to them and they trust that the issuer of that object did actually see that thing happening. And therefore it's a currency. I personally have some issues with this definition, but I really like as a sort of like a very broad notion of these like tokens.
I mean, the nice thing is all these different perspectives. You know, that money is an abstract concept, and it's hard to kind of say it is this, is that. It's an abstract concept, and it's really where you're standing. You know, and all of these different perspectives add up to kind of our shared belief of money in society, and value is what it feels like we're really hitting at, right? I mean, your diploma definitely doesn't feel like money. It's not very fungible, that's for sure. And it definitely has a different value based off of who has it. I have a chemical engineering degree. It's worthless. There's no value anymore. I basically threw it away because crypto is more exciting. And I think a lot of people, but however, if someone's working as a chemical engineer, in a factory, is designing factories or something, it has a lot of value.
We have another question from Pepe Litera. Hello, Giuseppe. Thanks for watching. From Sardex, he's asking, could you agree that unspendability of community as well as personal credit promises has no parallel with mainstream state bank money?
Unspendability of community. You guys have any ideas on that one?
Pepe, what do you mean unspendability?
I can't think of a parallel. I think this person means what I was saying of like, well, if I have all these circles tokens, but nobody trusts me, I can't spend them. I can't think of a direct parallel in the world of state.
Pepe runs Sardex, the Sardinian mutual credit system, which is like a really. So I'm interested to know what, if Pepe, if you're listening, what when you say unspendability, can you clarify like what you're meaning there? I don't know if he's online.
Yeah, I mean, would counterfeit money be almost something similar? It's not really fair. Or like sometimes in like South America, you get a bill that's kind of torn and no one will take it because the actual like the value of having a clean piece of currency that doesn't have any marks on it is actually high. I don't know. I don't think it's a great parallel, but that's all I can come up with.
Yeah, he says 1 sec. He's probably writing. Just, I guess in the meantime, I would say that, you know, the potentiality of the systems that we're building is that it allows for a different imagination of what is possible to do in economic terms and political terms. So it crosses the divides of what we have today, such as the, you know, state money, bank money, and so on, in the search of making what we call a money commons or a credit commons. And so whereby the people who issue the promises are also co-owners of it, right? The problem, as Brett was saying, is that most people just understand money as a commodity, and it's fetishized as a commodity, as private property. And so basically with things like circles and trust lines and all these other money systems is, how about if people were to own their own money and then organize economically and political projects through there? And then Giuseppe says, I mean, sour bank debt is dealt with in the system. This is what Giuseppe said.
Well, one thing that this comment brings about is the fact that it's not just about trusting the person in circles. It's also in some way trusting that they're going to be a competent node in the network of circles, right? If I might trust my mom, you know, and she sends me circles, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but mom, you don't know how to use this stuff, right? Like, it's probably actually not as valuable because you're not going to build a network, and I may never ever be able to send this to someone.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, it would be very interesting to. I mean, I know Pepe's already been on this this call a few weeks ago, but there's some quite interesting differences in the. So Sardex is like a, and I don't want to speak for Pepe, but it's like a big mutual credit system, and where basically there's a central administrator who sets the rules as to how many promises people can issue. Essentially, I don't know if Pepe would describe it like that, but that's how I would describe it. The central administrator says, you can issue this amount, and there's this, it will place the limits on how much people can go into debt with each other. What's interesting, and I guess what's a sort of variation in systems like Circles, is that there's no central administrator who controls that, but rather people take, they will, so for example, Griff, if you let in 10 people who are dodgy, all right, through like you trusting them, you the one who takes the hit, all right, because they're operating going through you to get into the system. And if I'm interacting with you, I don't care who you like that you claim that there's other people who's done it. Like you're my relation in the system, so you're the one who's on the line. Whereas in the sort of mutual credit systems, it might be the central administrator who's more on the line for like people like sort of say getting stuff from the system and then like running away. So anyway, that's just like a sort of interesting design sort of variation in these systems, but they all operate on the same intuition.
Just for interest, maybe what Brett's describing about the way that risk works in Circles. Actually, the best analogy for it, analogous system I've used is reputation systems in torrent communities. If any of y'all remember those, you used to be responsible for everyone you invited into the community maintaining a good seed to leach ratio. And so trust and inviting someone in actually meant something very, very similar. Your account would end up being penalized if you invited someone who was a bad actor.
Yeah, well, I think we're at the top of the hour, and it feels like a relatively decent place to kind of close it out. So maybe we'll do one round of final thoughts. I'll start. I think this was a great discussion, really about getting to the heart of what money is in some ways, and especially with a great example as Circles UBI to really define this. So thank you guys for doing this discussion with us. Brett?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. I mean, the last thing I'll say is that this is an extremely exciting area, and I don't know if you know Matthew Slater, who's like a very well-known person in the alternative currency communities, has coined this. Well, him and a few others talk about this concept of the credit commons, and Julio mentioned it today as well, which is this idea of like, so Circles is working on this, but there can also be other players, and they can all find ways to sort of mesh together. And actually, if we are authentically interested in challenging the mainstream fiat money system, I really don't believe we're going to do it with a static system like Bitcoin. We need a sort of dynamic, imagine it like a sort of like expanding and contracting mesh that's like embedded in real people across the world. I mean, that's what you really need. So that's what this credit commons idea is really about. Is creating this like interlinking federated network of different groups. So it's very exciting, and you should get involved.
Do you have any links or any way to promote the crypto credit commons?
Well, we'll probably put up a paper on it on the Community Currency Alliance website, but I don't know. Until then, you can for me, you can check out my new website, which is Altered States of .money. So that's Altered States of Money with a dot between of and money. And I got a YouTube channel and stuff as well, so you can find it. Just search for me.
And do you tweet or anything like that too?
Yeah. I'm at Suitpossum on Twitter. It's just SUITPOSSUM. It's a long story behind that, but
awesome. Thanks, Brett. Sarah, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to see you all. Please join Circles when we launch in September. I will try not to delay our launch by fucking up something integral to our code. Yeah, if you're interested in circles, you can find our Twitter at circles CBI. My personal one is this an art? Yeah, thanks for listening.
Julio?
Yeah, just thank you all for being here. And I think Brett, we didn't mention this, but as part of like trying to do this call for action, I think you might be helping out with the narrative for the Community Currency Alliance. So watch out for that. And yeah, for me personally, I guess, yeah, I can't wait for anybody anywhere to deploy their own hub of circles, whatever they are. So watch out.
Awesome. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about circles in more videos because Julio's always here with us. So